Hello and welcome to the FlexPro YouTube channel. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe. As always, let us know down in the comments what you guys want to see next. That is actually how we decide what videos we will be doing next. So please just let us know what you guys want to see. So today we're kind of going to break a bit of a tiebreaker war, so to speak, which is going to be honey versus maple syrup. Now, depending on where you're from, in North America especially, those can be two very controversial topics. There's going to be people in those northern states who say, how dare you ever put anything but maple syrup on your pancakes and waffles and things of that nature. But we're going to break it down not only on a taste aspect, but more so which of these gets you closer to the body that you're looking for, your nutritional goals, and which of them actually yields a better nutritional profile. So without further ado, let's jump into it.
I wanted to film a video just quick illustrating the difference between maple syrup and honey in terms of health benefits. So I recently did a video on sweeteners, sort of diving into sort of what the difference was between certain sweeteners. Now, it's pretty obvious by now that we want to try and avoid sugar. And the reason, quite simply, is because when you look at plain white sugar that you just find everywhere, it's sucrose. It's just highly, highly refined, highly processed. What exactly does that mean? Well, sugar usually comes from either cane sugar, or the sugar cane, or beets, which are usually genetically modified. Although by the time you reach the final product, sucrose, that white powdery sugar that you find, it really doesn't matter whether it's genetically modified or not. The genetic modification is a completely separate issue with respect to the environment, and that's on a plant-by-plant basis, so we'd have to dive into that. It's not just you can't just say a blanket statement that all GMOs are bad and all non-GMOs are good. It's not really that simple, I think, but we can always dive into that. We could always get into that conversation. With respect to sweeteners, though, the major concern over white sugar and why it's so bad is because it's just highly refined. You have to use many different steps and different processes using many harsh chemicals and a ton of heat to actually rip out and then concentrate the sugar essentially from the plant, whatever plant you're using. And that's why it's so bad for you. It's bad for you because of the process, the chemicals, the heat. And then obviously what you're left with is something that's so far removed from a natural food, it's really a chemical by itself. The body doesn't really, it uses sucrose, but it's used to taking it from food, right? It's used to converting it either from fats, from starches. It's used to getting it in the environment. It's not used to getting it through an isolated chemical compound. So you're just jamming tons of isolated refined sugar in the body, and it's a huge shock to the system. It's a huge shock to the pancreas. And in order to get it from the blood into your cells, the pancreas has to pump out tons of insulin. Insulin is what allows sugar from the blood to then go into your cells, which is where you end up using it. You use sugar in your cells to produce, to use it for energy, to survive, to do things in the body, brain function, muscle function, etc. So that's part of the reason. That's a separate issue. There are a lot of food sources, though, of sugar. It's not the same as sucrose. Like fruits have fructose, for example, right? Maple syrup and honey are very sweet naturally, so a lot of people use it to sweeten instead of using sugar, and I love them. I love them both. Maple syrup is a food. Same with honey. They're much more complex. It's not refined. They don't use harsh chemicals, especially if you can find organic and they're from local trusted sources. If you find the regular honey, by the way, just those regular mass-produced honey, I don't know what kind of chemicals they use. I don't know exactly, but they are using heat. They're pasteurizing it, and by the end of it, there's actually probably more sugar from the honey than all of the other compounds because they sort of die out from the heat anyway. And maple syrup, I'm not really sure, but again, it's best if you can find it from local farms and organic if you can. This is not organic maple syrup, I don't think. Actually, it was only $1 more for the organic stuff. So, really for $1, I could have just got it. But, there are some cases where you could argue, what's the difference between organic and non-organic? Is it really worth it? And maple syrup, I don't know. I really don't know. For green leafy vegetables, I would choose organic versus not. It's totally worth it, but it might not be worth it in every case, and that's totally up to you. The worst thing about maple syrup, though, in compared to choosing honey, is the heat. Maple syrup, although it's a whole food and is rich in other nutrients, it's way more complex than taking highly refined table sugar that you find everywhere. I'd much rather choose maple syrup in small quantities. But the worst thing about maple syrup, the reason why I would choose honey versus maple syrup every day of the week, is because when maple syrup comes out of the tree, it's heated. It's clear. It's a clear sap. In order to get that dark color maple syrup is boiled. It's heated over time, and it sort of boils down to create this thick syrup. Heated sugar is one of the worst things for human health. If you take sugar and mix it with water over a pan, over the stove, and you create a simple syrup, like if you're creating simple syrup for mixed drinks, for example, you'll know that as the pan is over the stove and over the fire, once you pour the sugar in and you're heating it, the liquid will turn brown, right? Water's clear, you add sugar to it, you add heat on the bottom, it actually turns brown, doesn't it? In the same way that if you take fat, if you take butter and you put it in a pan and you start heating it, it'll start to brown up, right? Eventually it gets burnt, but before it gets burnt and it gets scorched, even just from the low heat, it actually browns up. Well, same with sugar. That's an oxidation process. That brown sugar is one of the worst things for human health, aside from maybe rancid oils, in terms of from food, by the way. I mean, there's chemicals that are much worse. But you generate a lot of harsh chemicals when you heat sugar. And it's incredibly aging, incredibly pro-inflammatory in the worst of ways. It's just very bad for you. It's what contributes to heart disease and chronic disease in general. That's why you have to pay so close attention to cooking method. And then besides cooking method, you have to pay attention to oxidation that can happen in the body naturally through stress and the immune system going haywire, through other pro-inflammatory processes, which we can always talk about.
As a Canadian, maple syrup practically flows through my blood. There's a bunch of claims out there that maple syrup is a healthy, natural sweetener. But what exactly does that mean? Let's science it. First, we can look at the nutrient contents of maple syrup compared to sucrose, or your typical white table sugar. For an equivalent serving size, maple syrup is lower in calories and lower in sugar. Plus, it contains some beneficial minerals like calcium, zinc, and manganese. But it should be pointed out that these minerals are pretty low, and it's best to consume them in other sources of whole foods. There's been a fair bit of research into other antioxidant nutrients in maple syrup. Now, these antioxidants aren't essential for life, but they can help reduce oxidative stress in the body. Think of oxidative stress as rust. Over time, oxidative stress, or rusting inside the body, can contribute to many chronic diseases, like cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and it can accelerate the aging process. Diets that are high in antioxidant nutrients, like beta-carotene that makes your carrots orange, can reduce this oxidative stress. Chemical analyses have shown that maple syrup has a bunch of different antioxidant nutrients in it. And test tube studies have shown that maple syrup can reduce the reactions that lead to oxidative stress. And really interestingly, there's actually more of these antioxidants in the lower grades of maple syrup. So these are the syrups that are darker in color and harvested later in the season. So it seems like a good thing. Pour on the maple syrup, reduce my oxidative stress. But here's the thing. You'd have to consume tons of maple syrup to get in enough of those antioxidants to have any benefit. One serving of maple syrup has only a fraction of the antioxidant capacity of one serving of walnuts. Plus, so far, the maple syrup research has been in test tubes and cells in a dish, which is pretty different from a human. So we have no idea how well humans can absorb these beneficial nutrients and where they would go in the body. Plus, maple syrup is still mostly sugar. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommends consuming no more than 10% of your total daily calories as added sugar. So for a standard 2,000 calorie diet, this works out to 50 grams of table sugar. This is what 50 grams of table sugar looks like, or the equivalent of about a quarter cup of maple syrup. Putting all this together, we can ask two questions. First, is adding maple syrup to the diet healthy? No, too much added sugar. Question 2, is replacing white sugar with maple syrup a healthier choice? Maybe a little bit. Although this hasn't been directly studied, science suggests that there could be marginal to non-existent benefits of maple syrup at healthy levels of added sugar consumption. Although maple syrup does contain some beneficial nutrients, this doesn't completely offset the really high sugar content. There's currently some research going on with maple syrup extracts, which are essentially isolating away the antioxidants from all of that high sugar. And to me, this seems like a more feasible approach. So what do we do with this information? If you like the flavor of maple syrup, go ahead and use it to replace white sugar where applicable. Just make sure to still stay under that added sugar cap most of the time. Personally, I'll use maple syrup on those special occasions when I eat pancakes or baking a cake. And sometimes I'll use just a touch when I'm roasting vegetables or in a tasty bourbon cocktail. But overall, maple syrup doesn't play a prominent role in my dietary pattern.
So I had another question from someone that wanted to know, is honey a better substitute for sugar? Let's talk about that. Well, regular table sugar, refined sugar, is a 50-50 split between fructose and glucose. Honey is 60% fructose and 40% glucose, so it has more fructose. And the rationale that people use that honey is better than sugar for a diabetic, it's not going to affect your blood sugars, is because it's high in fructose. And fructose on the glycemic index is 19, so it's very, very low. So you're thinking, wow, it must be okay. But here's the problem. That glucose goes directly to your liver, and your liver is the organ that has to deal with it. All the other cells in the body can metabolize glucose, but the liver has to metabolize fructose, and this is the problem. So fructose is very damaging on the liver, and it does create insulin resistance, and it does cause a fatty liver. And so, no, honey is not a good substitute for sugar. The benefits of honey have to do with the antioxidants and some of the vitamins and the phytonutrients that can help people with allergies. And also, it can decrease the complications from diabetes because vitamins protect the cells, but it's not an alternative substitute for sugar, and I don't recommend it. And as a side note, because our environment is becoming more polluted, especially with insecticides, okay, like glyphosate, as in GMOs, okay, you're seeing a decrease in honeybees. I mean, recently it's like 40% less than it was several years ago. And the problem is 1/3 of all of our food is dependent on bees for pollination. And pollen is a fertilization agent to allow the plant to become more fertile and give off seeds. So we need these bees, but we don't need the honey.
Which is healthier, honey or maple syrup? Every tablespoon of honey contains 17 grams of carbohydrates, 17 of which are from sugars. These sugars are mostly from fructose with a bit from glucose and even less from sucrose. Between the two, maple syrup is healthier, it has less overall sugar, and more importantly, less fructose.
And there you have it, folks. A debate that has been lasting for years and years. A battle that's gone throughout the ages has been settled. Let us know what you think. And we look forward to talking to you all soon. Have an absolutely amazing week.